The way we organize our firms today is built on the great man theory of the 19th century. There's some big brain at the top that tells the automata what to do. But what we know is that made sense in a time, in a place where people were undereducated, where they didn't have context about what was going on across the organization. And as a result, they couldn't simulate, they couldn't think, they couldn't scenario plan their way to think through what the implications, second, third order implications of their decisions might be. AI changes all of that.
Welcome to ThoughtSparks. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and enjoy.
Everybody, and welcome to a week of ThoughtSparks podcast. I'm Rita McGrath, and my guest this week is a friend, a colleague, someone I admire, the futurist in resident at Amazon. Like, how cool is it to have a title like that? And the executive chairman of the Center for Radical Change. We've talked before about his previous book, Rogue Waves, and today we're here to talk about his co-authored book with Stephen Wunker called AI and the Octopus Organization. So welcome, Jonathan Brill, to the podcast.
Thank you, Rita. It's fantastic to be here. I really appreciate it.
So I'm loving this book about an octopus, and you open it up with a reflection on nature and how there was this like giant cataclysm that befell the earth, and one of the few creatures that managed to sort of work their way around that were indeed octopi. I guess that's what they call them.
Octopi or octopodes? There's a lot of questions about this. Yes.
I don't know. So maybe start off with, it's an interesting metaphor, right? So we're here talking about the book, the AI and the Octopus Organization. Talk a little bit about that metaphor and what does being a super intelligent firm mean?
So when we think about the way our brains work, right, we have a centralized mind. The majority of the thinking happens up here. In an octopus, less than a third of its neural tissue is actually in its head. It's distributed through the tentacles. And something fascinating happens with the octopus, which is that the tentacles think for themselves. And we know this because if a shark bites off an octopus's tentacle, it will go and attack the shark. It's thinking enough to actually survive. It's not instinct. It's, yeah, whoa. And so the point here is that there are other ways of thinking in nature that are suggest strategies in business. The way we organize our firms today is built on the great man theory of the 19th century. There's some big brain at the top that tells the automata what to do. Mm-hmm. But what we know is that made sense in a time, in a place where people were undereducated, where they didn't have context about what was going on across the organization. And as a result, they couldn't simulate, they couldn't think, they couldn't scenario plan their way to think through what the implications, second, third order implications of their decisions might be. AI changes all of that. And so when we talk about the octopus, this idea of a distributed mind where the tentacles are thinking for themselves, exploring, expressing for themselves, and then reporting up to kind of these tentacle brains in the what are weirdly called the shoulders that communicate to each other through a neural necklace. So what's going on here is the tentacles are exploring, saying, hey, I smelled something here through my skin, which is kind of a weird concept. Maybe we should all talk about that. So the tentacles talk to each other, and then they tell the big brain what they've just done. Right? So decisions, innovation, strategy in very real ways is going from the bottom of the organization to the top. And this is stuff you've written about, we've talked about for years. But the technology hasn't been there to make it really possible at scale. All of a sudden, it is. As business leaders, right, as project managers, the first thing that you should be thinking is like, that sounds crazy, right? Like, I can't trust my people to do stuff. But the other interesting thing about AI and the way the octopus works is when there's a problem, it'll turn its eye over to this tentacle. The other 7 will be doing their own thing to help it capture a fish or whatever it is that needs additional oversight. and then it'll give up control, and the octopus will feed itself.
Hmm.
You can use the same technologies that give people better executive judgment, right? AI plus your average employee is going to be smarter than Einstein in a couple of years. And context, right? If you use any of the transcription tools, right, across your organization, people can access that if you give them access to it, and have context dashboards that like CEOs dream of today. The technology is there. It's just not distributed in your organization yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third piece is scenario planning, thinking through the problem. What does this mean? It means that as a leader, you have better awareness, or like the politically incorrect term is surveillance, about what's going on in your organization, like you have always dreamt of, right? So you can go down, you can see where the innovations are, where the opportunities are, and so on and so forth, and figure out there's something going on over here. Let's cluster those indigenous innovations and scale them up across the organization. Right? We've never been able to do that at scale before. And so structural innovation has always been top down instead of bottom up. But in a world where technology is improving, it's something like 6 or 8 times a year.
It's unbelievable.
In 5 years, these AI tools might be like 32 times better, brighter, smarter.
Mm-hmm.
Plus your people who have learned how to use them. Like, you're talking about value multipliers at a pace we've never seen before, innovation multipliers at a pace we've never seen before. If we can learn to change how we operate, if we can build the emotional fortitude as leaders to give up control, because that's going to be the limiter. It's not the technology and it's not our people. It's going to be us. This isn't foundationally a technological problem. It's a sociological problem. How do we build leaders much earlier in their careers? And how do we, as leaders who have spent decades getting good at the things we do, give up control as those skills get commoditized?
Absolutely. So you talk about in the book. So the book, first of all, it's very practical, right? I mean, it's really lots of examples, but also kind of short. It's not encyclopedia sized. Um, um, and you and I share this, I think, perspective on kind of the bigger picture of evolution. So, I feel that we are, and I think you and I have touched on this. We're in this just massive transition that nobody who's alive today has ever experienced before, which is we're going from this world of cheap energy, mass production, where competitive advantage emerged from physical things, where your ability to produce a million widgets that are exactly the same was what drove you to success. And we're moving to this world, which we haven't quite figured out yet, where products are now services, where things are digital, where value is not created by consumption necessarily of stuff, where value is created by perhaps consumption of experiences or other kinds of things. And AI is sort of ushering us into this world. But right now, we're right in between. We're in the middle. And one of the things I think is valuable about your book is that it begins to give people a sense for where to start. So I'm one of my podcast listeners might be, say, a senior level person in a firm that has not yet, maybe they've laid a little AI fairy dust in their call center or something, but they're not doing a root and branch sort of review.
Right.
How do they start? Where do they get going?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's, what you're talking about is what AI is going to change, right? It's input, process, output type of problem. And you're talking about the outputs, right? The things people or software buy, right, are going to change. That may be true. I believe it to be true, but we don't quite know what that is. And the inputs are going to change. I actually think that the inputs to our businesses are likely to be the same. 80%, 75% of American businesses are services businesses. So our inputs are humans and knowledge, right? Humans and data and processing of that data. Our processes are processing that data. Maybe we get a contact form in from our website saying, I want a speech, or I want cleaning services, or whatever it is that you make, right? And then the outputs. What we've discovered historically is when you do innovation work, right? Value in innovation is typically in the outputs. We're going to make a disruptive product, right? Uh, and and that's kind of where we focused innovation to date, because innovation to date in terms of internal processes has turned out to be relatively difficult to monetize.
Yes. Yes.
But what we're seeing with AI is all of our assumptions about how we process information in our organizations are getting reinvented.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at organizations, and I think that the most recent news about Stripe laying off 40% of its workforce because of AI, I think that's a nonsense argument.
Mm-hmm.
What we are going to see in white collar work is that 15 or so percent of the tasks in our organizations are automatable in the next 5 years. No one's really questioning that. That's from McKinsey Global Institute. It follows with data we've seen. It tracks with the latest studies from Anthropic, and so I think that's a true statement. So everyone's going to get an hour a day back of nonsense task switching work that made it impossible to do their jobs, and we're going to use that work to be dramatically more innovative as companies. But for tasks that organization structures where there are those repeated tasks, right? The call center, right? Level 1 call center. Did you plug in your computer today? Did you turn on the power button? People should not be doing that. Retention on those jobs is like, you change people out 150% a year. Like, is not good. Those jobs are going to go away. But for the jobs that have more variability in them, and more of the jobs will have more variability in them because consumers will expect that of us, right? We're going to see value add. My point about the innovation side of this is AI is doing two economic things we need to think about in our organizations. One is radically accelerating the rate of innovation, right? The rate at which people in our organizations can automate a task. Right. So when you think about a company like Lovable, which is a vibe coding company, you can explain in English what you want a piece of software to do, and then it writes a piece of code. Right. I was talking to a company called S1 the other day. 60+% of the code they are producing, right, is actually coded by AI.
Wow.
What you're going to find is that your people, your secretary, your grandma is going to be using tools like this too. It won't sound like that's what they're doing, but they'll be writing code to solve problems, to make things easier in their lives. As that happens, the rate of innovation in your firm, the rate of process innovation in your firm is going to go through the roof, and the cost is going to go to near zero.
Mm.
The reason I bring up Lovable is they're the fastest growing startup in human history. They got to $100 million ARR in 8 months. They got to 200 in 12 months. Wow. And then they hired their first sales manager.
Oh, wow. And
How did they do that?
Did they take?
They were growing too fast to hire anyone. And so their people wrote code to manage the processes to do the things. And by the way, they're a vibe coding company. So they wrote that code in normal English, like your grandma knows how to do, to explain what they want. And it was possible. Let's be fair. There were also a bunch of alpha coders. But, that's because this stuff was hard a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
2 years from now, it is not.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question about what do you need to be thinking about as a manager, 3 things. And I want you to make a list and then put it in your AI and ask it to report back what is now possible every month or so, because you won't do it. That's the first thing you need people to do. Build a process, let AI do it for you. And here's the list I want you to make. First, what are the things we cannot do today because we don't have an infinite number of labor and we don't have an infinite number of brains? What are the things we can't do?
The desirable things that we can't do.
Desirable things we can't do. They're not even on the roadmap because they're batshit. The second thing, what are the things that we shouldn't do? Dory Clark, a mutual friend of ours, she said something, and I don't know where the statistic came from, but she's generally researches her stuff, that only 25% of the tasks we do are actually a part of our quote unquote job and the job description. Our research at HP was about 65% of the tasks that we do are not in our job description. My point being, that's probably a lot of work we shouldn't be doing. What are those things we shouldn't do? Make that list. Ask AI when it's possible to start to replace those things. Those are fun questions. What if we make AI as a god? What if we replace a lot of labor? Great CFO questions. We talk about them in the small rooms all the time, never in the big rooms. And the reality is, like I said, I don't think that there's going to be enough automation for this mass job loss that like Andrew Yang was on the news yesterday yammering about. It's not true. It will happen at some point. It will happen at some point in the mid 2030s. It's not happening on Tuesday. The second piece, or the third piece that I want you to ask is, um, what are the things that we don't do? What are the things that are too expensive or too fatiguing for humans to do? And so we just ignore them, right? Why don't I go to the gym? Kinds of questions for our business. And I'm the head of invention at a company called Deep Invent, and we're doing something. We're reinventing the research lab. One of the things we discovered is when you write a patent to get the subject matter experts in a room to figure out what the patent should be, to get the lawyers in there, to get the product manager, to get the approvals, it's typically a $500,000 process. Right? It's 6 to 9 months. It's a huge pain in the neck. So no one ever does that before we know what the product is and that we're like kind of committed in that direction. Well, it's 6 to 9 month process that costs $500,000. What if it was a 45-minute process that your grandma could do because she has a new idea for her quilting circle and it costs $40? Right? What would you do differently? The second you see an opportunity, you would first of all write a patent moat around your competition. And second, patent everything you could around your category area, and then move forward, knowing that you're building options. The patents aren't granted yet. You're building options, but opening up an entire space of opportunity for yourself, right? For hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, what are those things that you don't do in your organization today? Because they're just too painful. But AI could make easy.
Mm-hmm.
Make that list, have your AI report back once a month or so, what it's learned, what's now possible.
Super interesting. Super interesting. So so that's sort of the awareness part. So I mean, automation clearly runs throughout the book. For those of you just joining us, I'm here with Jonathan Brill. We're talking about his co-authored book, AI and the Octopus Organization, Building the Superintelligent Firm. But you're clearly treating AI as a tool that underpins a whole different kind of organizational logic. Um, and in your previous book, which was about rogue waves, and I love the metaphor in that book where you talk about, you know, all these forces come together to create this very unpredictable situation. You've got the wind power and the wave velocity and the direction of it sort of shifts. And if you're not sort of anticipating something like that, it can really just knock you over completely.
Yeah.
And you carry that theme on in this book. So what are some of the things that you've seen companies do to kind of get ahead of this? In the book, you talk about P&G, you talk about Siemens, you talk about Stripe,
Yeah.
as companies that are sort of getting a bit ahead of these things, which are,
Right.
when looked at through one lens, they seem completely unpredictable. When looked at through another lens, and this is a lot of my own work, right, which is
Right.
always early warnings. I mean, there's always stuff that comes ahead that gives you signals. So how do you recommend folks pick up on those signals and then get the organization to do something about it?
Well, this is the challenge, right? You have a whole bunch of people who are paid to not know the future in a world where we must. And
I love
so,
that phrase. That's great. I was just yesterday, in fact, with this company that is just like take operator and like 10 exit, and that's what this company's like. I mean,
yeah,
everybody's got their heads down. We're just doing today, da 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 da, da. And
yeah,
they're operating with technologies that are 100 years old, and they're just
yeah,
turning the crank, and money comes out. And
yeah,
I'm like, not that you're doing anything wrong, people, but this is
right,
not going to last forever.
yeah. Well, I think there's two sides here, right? There's one. What is the investor thesis? If the investor thesis is that we are going to milk this company, it's really hard to make the change,
Yes.
right? And so if you're in that organization, these are the organizations that have a lot of problems. Or the investor thinks this is we're going to wait till the technology is ready, right? The story they don't tell you about Netflix is that Carl Icahn said, "Hey, wait a second." In 2000, 2001, when Mark Randolph goes famously and it says, "Hey, we want to sell you for we want to sell you to us for $50 million." And the reality is, well, the
They went to,
technology
this
is
just
going
for
to
the
do that.
context. They went to Netflix went to Blockbuster because they were kind of on the roof, and begged to be Blockbuster's on sort of online arm,
Yeah.
as it were.
This was about 2001. Carl Icahn says, "No, absolutely not. We're a real estate company, blah, 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 blah." And the thing is, in 2001, he was right. The technology wasn't going to be there until 2006, 2007, right? And then it was going to scale 2008, 9, 10. He was totally right on his timeline. The thing that Netflix got right and the thing that Blockbuster missed is there is going to be a disruption. In the case of Blockbuster, that thing was the 2008 financial collapse.
Mhm.
They had to scale, they had to access capital through that collapse. And what do investors do to legacy companies that are trying to change their platform in financial collapse? They run with the new horse. And that is foundationally what happened between Netflix and Blockbuster. Similar thing happened with Kodak, really a leader until 2006, 2007 in terms of professional camera imaging. Right? The problem was not their ability with the technology. It wasn't the road mapping. It was that in 2001, 2002, 2003, when consumer camera technologies became possible, they were dealing with the collapse of their photographic print business because September 11th stopped people from flying to Orlando to go on vacation at Disneyland. Right? My point here is that as a leader who's thinking about these transitions, they're thinking about these innovations. You know, can you time not the technology? Can you time the market? Because even Warren Buffett can't do that.
Well,
So
so
you've got,
I want to come back to the Kodak story because it ties a
yeah,
little bit to your past at HP. So
yeah,
you remember Antonio Perez,
yeah,
genius, right?
mhm,
Creates the printer business at HP out of nothing. So
yeah,
it's grows it to like an $8 billion business or something. And then rightfully thinks he should be made the CEO. The board disagrees and appoints Carly Fiorina, and now both of them have a problem, right? So he thinks he should have been CEO. She's now the CEO. Both of them have to figure out how they're going to do something. So she kind of parks him off in a joint venture with Kodak.
mhm,
And this is going back a ways. He tries to talk the board into buying Kodak. Board says no. And then eventually, when the CEO role opens up at Kodak, he takes that role.
mhm,
And by God, is he going to show his former employer what a mistake they made not putting him in the leadership role? And he aims
mhm.
the entire country at the entire company at printing, just as printing was becoming increasingly irrelevant. And that's the sort of secondary story that gets told about Kodak that nobody talks about.
Right. And these are kind of fascinating things. These are stories about individuals and how they see the world.
Mhm.
When I was at HP, we're a little off the subject of the book, but when I was at HP, we identified 5 process innovations in the firm
Hmm.
that would give us flexibility if there was a land war in Europe, if there was a pandemic, if there was an
Oh,
energy shock, if there was a
uh-huh.
financial shock. And when those things happened, what happened was really interesting. Carl Icahn, who seems to be the villain in this story today, Carl Icahn was trying to lock up Xerox and HP. So this is one of those moments. These are the business case studies that like professors dream of, because you have an actual AB, right? Companies that are making their money in printing, right? And so Carl Icahn's trying to lock these two companies up. He's optimized Xerox to the bone. He thinks he can spin out the computer business. Probably he can optimize HP in the same way. So he's trying to lock them up, and it looks like it's going to work. And then COVID hits, and something interesting happens, which is that Xerox's earnings per share drops 69% because they haven't figured out how to be operationally more innovative in times of change. And HP hits all-time earnings, margin, unit, sales highs, and the deal falls apart. HP survived because it thought about how to be more operationally innovative in times of change.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about AI, yes, we get the value add from telling people that we have AI in our chewing gum. And yes, we get the value add from saying, hey, we're going to decrease our head count, by which I mean we're going to outsource and have the same number of heads, but we're going to call it something different and put somewhere different on our P&L. Yes, that's possible. But where the real value is in that operational flexibility, the ability to look through your tentacles, to smell, to see, to feel the world with greater granularity, and to act faster than leadership could ever have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you going to do that? How are you going to think about that
Mm-hmm.
in your organization? Because I buy your thesis about the end of competitive advantage. So in a world where it is the end of competitive advantage, we're moving into a world where, in terms of product, right? We are moving into a world where it is all about operational advantage.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
A
that's
world
interesting.
where the products are important, but how we get them to customers, how we deliver value in a changing world
Mm-hmm.
is increasingly important.
Mm-hmm. And that's really one of the core ideas behind the book, which is I hadn't thought about the real advantage being whatever it is you're selling, the operational issue being the thing that's going to separate out the winners from the losers. I hadn't put that
When
in
you
that.
can deliver value and other people can't, you can charge excess rents, right? At the beginning days of COVID, Amazon's retail business did 10 years of growth in 90 days, right? Why? Because no one else could deliver, and they could. And then they kept the growth. Right? In a world of decreasing disruption, which is what we kind of saw until maybe 2008 or 2012, and suddenly business schools are waking up to this, all of the scientific based management processes make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
In a world of increasing disruption, the question is, do you want to be engaged in disruptive innovation, or do you want to be innovating disruption?
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that the latter is a really powerful argument,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a study between, I think it was 1999 and 2014, and I believe it was BCG, that found, and then there was a follow-on, and there's a Harvard Business Review article about this from McKinsey Global Institute. The McKinsey Global Institute study said that over, I believe, that time period, that companies had, and I believe it was 82% higher economic profits over time if they invested in strategic resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So in a world where disruption is increasing, is the engaging in disruptive innovation with a, let's say, a 90-80% failure rate, is that the win? Or is just being able to deliver new value when your competitors can't, the
Oh,
opportunity?
that's interesting.
Because I don't know if you're going to win disruptive innovation, but I do know you're going to be disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, what does that suggest for what senior leaders should have on their agenda, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, and I think your book. So just so that for people maybe just joining us, I'm here with Jonathan Brill, and we're talking about AI and the Octopus Organization, which is really, I guess, the idea. One of the premises is you really want to push decision making and sensing sort of out to the edges of the organization, kind of like an octopi. octopus's tentacles. Um, and how do you think about that? Because I think one of the issues that we do face, especially in older organizations, is, over time they accumulate stuff, right? They accumulate processes, they accumulate approvals. There's power dynamics. If I get to be a senior leader in one of these things, it comes with all kinds of perks and hierarchy. And what you seem to be suggesting is all that stuff is not good for their long-term survival.
I don't know. I like perks and hierarchy myself. But so I'm not going to argue against that. But what I do know is this, that they also accumulate myths.
Mm,
And in a world where technology is improving by 6 or 8 times a year, those myths can be deadly.
mm,
Right, saw the CEO of Ford, right, a few months ago. He goes to China and he gets in a BYD car, I think, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. How come no one really told me about this?" Now, I don't believe no one really told him about it, but I do believe he didn't really get the concept because he hadn't been on the ground in China since before COVID. I
mhm,
don't know that for a fact, but what I do know is, part of my job is, when Maduro gets taken uh, out of Venezuela, a week later, I was in the jungle with Venezuelan resistance trying to understand what was going on. And
wow,
this hasn't really hit the U.S. yet, but when there's a Supreme Court decision in Panama that says that Chinese companies can't own the Pacific port, C.K. Hutchinson Port in Panama, like that week, I was on a plane over the port trying to understand what was going on for a client. Like, you can't trust the New York Times. You've got to get in there on the ground to see what's not being reported.
mm,
And you got to get executives in those places. You got to have intelligence about what's going on. You've got to be out there at the edge. And if you're a larger organization, that means your people who are on the ground getting information to you, helping you make strategic decisions, and innovating on your behalf faster than you have a strategy.
mm. And would you say executives resist doing that? Or it hasn't occurred to them, or why would they not?
I think we get into this game of, if I operate faster, if I run faster, then I will outrun, I will win the race. And the problem with that is, like, you put the hamster on the wheel and you start running the wheel faster. Eventually, the hamster starts doing somersaults and he tries to catch up. And eventually, the hamster has a heart attack.
Mhm,
Right? In a world of accelerating change, in a world of digitally accelerating innovation,
mhm,
that's no longer possible.
mhm,
When you think about, human performance,
mhm,
Usain Bolt, fastest man in the history of the planet, unbelievable, right?
mhm,
He goes, I think, 44 kilometers an hour, I think 27 miles an hour, right, for 3.5 seconds. That is the fastest any human has ever gone. 8.4 billion of us on the planet, maybe 60 billion. I don't know what the number is. People who have passed away faster than anyone. And that's held up for like over a decade, right?
mhm.
That's the fastest human can go without technology. And I don't mean sneakers.
My friends at Nike would be very offended.
You make him 32 times faster, right? What we're going to see in terms of AI,
Mm,
we jack into our minds in the next 5 years, make him 32 times faster. He's literally in a rocket ship breaking the sound barrier 365 days a year, 7 days a week, nonstop, 24 hours a day for the rest of his life,
wow.
right? You are not going to out innovate that by running faster. You have to out innovate that by understanding the problem, understanding how the game is changing, redefining the rules so that the game makes you win instead of you winning by outrunning it,
Mm, interesting.
right? It's about being more agile to a changing world, but also more strategic in terms of how you turn the levers.
Mhm,
And you can only do that by understanding the game before it starts.
mhm.
I don't think that leaders have been incentivized to do that in traditional cultures. I think they're incentivized to hit the quarter, to run
Mhm.
things faster, which is important. Cash is the lifeblood of the organization.
Mhm.
Happy analysts are the lifeblood of the organization. Meeting your investor requirements are the lifeblood of the organization. I get that. But there's this dual responsibility
Mhm.
of setting up the organization for the world after. And what we've thought is that world is going to happen after we're out of our job, right? Our current role. And so we won't be responsible for the decisions we made.
Mhm.
What we're seeing is that the world is moving toward us faster than ever before. And in that crucible is the reality, which is if your average lifespan of a CEO is what, 3.5 years now, something like that. If you used to think it was a 7 year or 10 year issue,
Mhm.
there's a 50% chance it's going to happen
On your watch.
on your watch. So are you going to make a 50% bet that is not? These are the ways we've got to be thinking in an increasingly disruptive, accelerating world.
Mhm. So it seems like a completely different playbook almost if you're running these sort of octopus organizations. And to come back to the burdens of a legacy incumbent just for a sec,
Yeah,
um, they've got silos, right? They've got
yeah,
information which is not widely shared. They've got
yeah,
bits and pieces of data all over the
yeah,
place and they don't connect to each other and nobody knows what they're doing. And
yeah.
so are you suggesting we should set like a chunk of budget aside to clean all that up or make it somebody's job? Or, how do you as a senior leader figure out what to do? Because you're quite right. I mean, it's not going to show up as sins of omission. The things I didn't do that I
Mhm,
should have done are not punished nearly as much as sins of commission are, right? And I think that's one of the things that does trip
mhm.
up senior leaders, which is, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff I know I should be doing. I know I should go to the gym. I know I should do all these other
Sure.
things, but I'm not getting a paycheck or getting rewarded for doing any of those things. So how do we shift that mindset?
Well, often, the ship needs to start burning, right? So, uh, I started talking with Justin Finelli, who's the CTO of the United States Navy, and we're
Ooh.
doing research with him right now. Because something amazing happened there, right? People don't innovate because they're bored. I mean, I ran invention firms for 20 years, so I do. But what I know is like, you don't want a lot of me in your firm. You want one or two or three in a 50,000 person firm. You don't want 500 or 1,000. I know that, right? So I'm saying that like, most organizations don't innovate because it's fun. I like breaking things. It's a problem. I also like lighting things on fire. There's a whole bunch of you can talk to my mom about my arson problems. But my
It's an
point
interesting child to raise.
being, but my point being, you don't want a lot of that in an efficient organization. It doesn't really help the machine. Um, so organizations don't innovate because they want to. They innovate because they need to. In the U.S. Navy, right? This is the largest major organization, old organization in the United States. It's older than the United States. They're incredibly command and control. You might be regulated by Congress. They're owned by Congress. You might have trouble knowing your budget next year. It's March. They still don't know their budget for this year, right? Like all of those things, you might be dealing with old equipment. They're dealing with weapon systems from World War II, fighting a war in Iran,
Really?
right?
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. This is like these. They have 50-year issues, 75-year
Wow.
issues. And so my point is they are incredibly command and control. And they watched something in Ukraine, which is the Ukrainians started taking jet skis, ski-doos or sea-doos, putting weapons on them, putting explosives on them, and then blowing up billion-dollar Russian destroyers. And they looked at this math, $100,000, $1 billion. Well, this isn't going to work. We got to accelerate our innovation. So Justin said, okay, we're going to do that. And here's the lesson. So we're going to do that. How do we do that in a world where if you fail, you don't get promoted? Well, he calls all the 3 stars and he says, okay, here's my deal. I'm going to find some kids and going to put them on technology suicide missions and see what they do. And so he goes and he's like, looks for volunteers, 770,000 people. He's able to find 7.
Oh, geez.
Sailors that he are what he calls unleashed. Kids who will just run through walls, right? Who will just jump in the cold ocean, right? To make things happen, to hit the mission. 7. So he takes those kids out, says, I want you to do this, 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 and vague mission, just accomplish it. Well, first one fails. Kid gets a promotion. Second one fails. Kid gets a promotion. Third one fails. Fourth one's successful. He calls the kid up from, let's say, San Diego to the Pentagon. And you can imagine this kid, right? He walks in, he's like, sir, what's going on, sir? And he says, son, I want to personally thank you for changing the face of the United States Navy. This is what I love about our service members. They are so humble. So Justin says, all right, well, the Navy would like to thank you. What can we do? Kid says, well, I really like Wired magazine. I'm wondering if the Navy could afford a subscription. Justin says, well, I don't know about that. But one moment, he picks up the phone, calls the editor of Wired, says, I got a kid here who just changed the face of the United States Navy. Could you send a photographer over here to take a picture of him? I'd love to get an article in Wired. Click. You can imagine that kid's face.
Wow.
So what happens next? You go from 7 kids to 16 kids to 32 kids, 64. They now got 500 unleashed sailors in the U.S. Navy. And what has happened over the last 18 months is that they have 10x the rate of technology delivery to fleet. This year, they will deliver more technology to fleet than in the previous decade. Has the budgets increased? Yeah, the budgets have increased. We've all increased budgets and nothing's happened. That's not what happened. Have the number of vendors increased? Yeah, the number of vendors have increased 2.5 times. We've all increased the number of vendors and nothing has happened. This is a culture shift. It's a change in how we incentivize, how we operate, and how we show up as leaders to drive the psychological safety of people we are trying to ask to take strategic risk on our behalf. And the question is, a leader is, are you going to do that? Are you willing to do that? Because if you aren't, change won't happen.
Right.
If you are, just like the Navy, you got a fighting chance. You have problems. You might be an insurance company and you might be dealing with retirees' capital. You might be in healthcare and regulated by Congress and dealing with people's lives. But if you are not putting nuclear weapons at the bottom of the ocean for months at a time, I would propose that maybe, just like the Navy, you can do something too.
I love that. What an inspiring story.
So like it's unbelievable, right? It's just treating humans like humans.
Well, so that brings me to something I did want to touch on, which is, back to the book. So the book again is the Octopus AI and the Octopus Organization, and you spend a whole chapter on emotion.
Yeah.
What are the emotions that leaders have to be prepared to deal with? And that's not sort of the normal sandwich contents for a business book.
Although there was a back and forth about with Steve about. So my partner Steve, he's like he's like a Bain Harvard MBA type. I'm obviously the mad scientist, right? So it's really fun. We have these great battles between us. And I was like, it's the emotional stuff that matters. Like I know this, leading inventors, right? If they don't feel comfortable, they're not gonna blow stuff up, right? It's not how it works. We had this conversation. So we did a study with the Harrison assessment of 2.7 million managers understand why some are more success. I love that we're burying the lead on minute 43 here. That some are more successful in times of disruption than others. And it turns out that there are four simple things, and like this follows the academic literature, Rita. Like when you read it, right? Like they do four things. One is they leverage help more from their peers than their peers. If you don't know the answer, the probability of someone else knowing it, probably much better than you. The second is that they're much more open to unexpected connections. They have larger uh, relationships across socioeconomic spectra and larger relationships across industry. This is known, this is a known thing, that this increases your potential. So you ask for a lot more help and you have a lot more people to ask for help from, the probability of things going well for you goes through the roof. Also, the probability of you getting access to things for which you are not yet ready goes geometric. And people who do this early in their careers learn how to manage strategic risk in different ways. They don't use standard operating procedures because they're constantly in new situations at different scales, right? Quantum physics work, and at different scales, Newtonian physics make a lot more sense. So they're always looking for what's the new model, and that requires first principles thinking about what is going on, how are we dealing with the risk. So we talked about leveraging help. We talked about unexpected connections. We talked about controlling chaos. And the interesting thing here is when you know how to do those things, a fourth thing becomes possible. Bruce Lee talked about it. And he said, the difference between me and a street fighter is a street fighter is going to come in adrenalized and he might get the first punch off. Man, that's going to hurt. But I come in calm. Why? It's because when you get adrenalized, your eyes dilate and literally your depth of field decreases.
Ah,
I come in calm. I have better peripheral vision. I'm seeing where things are, what has changed. I'm going to use the physics of the moment to create leverage to win the match.
hmm.
So when you leverage help, unexpected connections, you know how to control chaos. You can walk into almost any situation calm because you know you're going to find a way out of it.
Hmm.
And so instead of focusing on what's there, what's right in front of you, you step back and you take the time to be innovative. You take the time to know what's missing. So when you leverage help and unexpected connections, when you control chaos and you know what's missing, you have a way to teach your people how to be lucky instead of on accident, on purpose, how to make better decisions under uncertainty. But you also have a mnemonic to remember it. Luck. Luck isn't chance. It's a science. It's a choice. It's a thing you can build in your organization. And it's how you move the people at the bottom of your organization into the types of decisions that will drive strategic opportunity for you, for your community, for our future.
Pretty inspiring. And so, if you think about like the job of a CEO,
Mm-hmm.
and we used to kind of know what that was, right? And sort of the canonical example would be somebody like Lee Iacocca, right?
Sure.
So I hire people that are smarter than me, and then I get out of their way. That's like that was the textbook I certainly came.
You hire VPs who are smarter than you, and then you get out of their way.
That was
Question is,
the
did you hire a lot of B grade, C grade people lower in the organization? I would argue that was true at Chrysler.
well,
It's not a bad thing. It's a strategic decision,
but what
and it allows you to scale.
well, in a predictable world, right? I mean, yes, if you're scaling for the known, but what I would observe is, in this research for this new book I'm working on, and I'm curious whether you see this in your octopus organizations, is I am seeing these leaders are not hands off at all. but now they're not telling people what to do. And this is really interesting. So they're not command and control type people, but they're like at the edges. They're in the decisions. They're in the rooms. They might have a span of control of 40 or 50 people. Right.
Mhm.
So if you look at somebody like Jensen Huang at NVIDIA would be like a canonical example, right? He's in there with whiteboards. He's talking to people. He has his famous thing that he does on Sunday where everybody in the company writes a short email about the 5 most important things they're going to do the following week. And
Mhm.
he's on the distribution lists for those. And he just randomly drops in and reads some of them.
Mhm.
And so he's really connected, but they're
Mhm.
not making the decisions. And I think it's a different
Mhm.
role. And I'm not sure we're preparing
Mhm.
people very well for that role.
No, I mean, I think what he's doing and is really interesting is it is a thing that's much better to do with AI,
Mhm.
right? But there are two things in the way that he approaches it, right? One is he's got his leaders, and they all have leadership meetings together, so that when he teaches someone, when he says something, everybody learns the lesson. So it's not dressing one person down; it's dressing one person down so that 39 people can avoid that
Oh, yeah, and he
experience.
deliberately says he doesn't do one-on-ones. He just won't.
Yeah. And I wonder about that as an approach as a leader. That's not my style.
Oh,
But
what I love what he says about that, though. He says, "Oh, I
yeah.
hate to fire people, so I torture them into greatness."
Well, it's he's also torturing them into a court system. So like there's aspects of that that work and don't. But the lesson here for me, is like that's clearly working for NVIDIA at the moment in the type of organization that they are. That might or might not work for your organization. But what AI is going to do is it's going to give you that ability to look down into the organization, have awareness about what's going on across in a way that was never possible, with granularity and speed that was never possible before, right? And the biggest thing, the most important thing is, as a leader, if you know everything that's going on, not to micromanage.
Mm,
If you micromanage, people never learn, and you never get out of it. It also feels really good to be in control. And this is the balance that I think we need to learn as leaders, is that our job is to grow people, to create psychological safety, to create well-being. And there's a reason we've been talking about it in the academy for what, 25 years, since Amy started talking about it, 35 years.
this would be
Oh,
Amy Edmondson for those that don't
yeah.
know the reference. This is Amy Edmondson's concept of psychological safety.
Like,
Um,
we've been at it for a long time. So why is it not happening? We give, like, every HR department gives face to this idea, and yet it doesn't happen.
mhm,
And I would argue that there are two reasons. One is because the command and control structure, because of our technology, the way we coordinate. If you got 40 employees and you're working 40 hours a week, you're going to give your best employee an hour, and you're going to give your worst employee an hour, and everybody in the middle gains no growth because you can't do it. But with AI, it can actually help all of those people make decisions. There's a company called Brevity that's exploring this. It's maybe worth looking at. The other thing is, in a world where our people suddenly have to make decisions better than we can build strategy, right? We had strategy, then execution, freeze, unfreeze, and then we have strategy, execution in theory now. Now we're moving into a world where maybe we have execution before strategy. That means our people are ahead of our strategy.
Oh, interesting. Say more about that.
Well, let's think about that for a second, right? Like, in a world of disruption, the people on the ground know what's going on before we do,
Mhm,
right? It's infantry versus special forces,
mhm.
right? Or in the Navy, right? We have submarines, right? And the submarines, man, I'm just telling you, like, there are manuals for how many times to screw a screw in, right? But if you're a so everything is command and control, right? If you're a naval aviator, there's a list of, like, the things you don't do. If you saw Top Gun, right, Tom Cruise gets in trouble, right, because he goes below the flight floor, right? He's like pushing the edge on everything, and then he actually breaks one of the rules, right? If you're a naval aviator, there's a different set of rules because we don't know what's going on, like when you come off of the aircraft carrier, right? It's going to be crazy out there. So a different set of rules for different types of work. My point is that I think we are moving into the world of naval aviation in business and away of the world of leading submarines. Right? We need to figure out what are those rules you cannot break because people are going to find opportunities faster than we can tell them what to do.
Wow. So if you think about 5 years from now, let's just say,
Yeah.
which is not a unreasonable time frame
No.
to think about. What do you think are going to be the big differences? Like, who are the winners going to be? Who's going to wish they'd done something this year that they didn't? You
Yeah.
what are some of those organizations going to look like? Because one of my ideas, and I
Yeah.
don't know, is if your unit of value creation is dropping to the level of small teams or even individuals, right?
Mhm.
And your unit of production is not mass production, but highly customized things, that are going to find their way to someone who will pay you to produce them, lovable, that kind of company. Are we going to see 100,000 person organizations thriving, or does all that corporate infrastructure somehow begin to fade away?
So I think the death of middle management has been greatly overemphasized.
It's been predicted for years. I mean,
It's
decades.
we
Decades.
just have more companies with more middle managers, maybe not one company with more middle managers, right? So my point being that the role of middle management, which is kind of where we traditionally find the quote unquote fat, and then we outsource to some agency, and the agency fills that fat again. And I don't believe the fat's necessarily been lost. But the role of the middle manager is going to move from quality assurance to process design,
Mm,
right? So a lot of the QA, I think, is going to just the standard boom, 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 boom. Did people fill out the reports? Like that's going to go away. But in the place of that is going to be more complexity and more process. We're going to have human labor and we're going to have computational labor, right? And today, maybe SAP is 20% of your finance organization, and your people are 80% of it. That's about to invert.
mm,
That means that people down at the bottom can write code to innovate processes at incredible speed by just saying, here's what I need to have happen
mhm,
if you release them to. And I think that we need to be thinking about that. Not does the middle manager go away? Do companies get smaller? I think for some companies that may be true, but for other companies, absolutely not. It really depends on your industrial structure. It
mm,
depends on your operational structure, right? If you have a company like Unlimited Services Group that does repair for restaurants, right? The number of HVAC techs is not going down. The number of things they do, the amount of predictive maintenance is going to go through the roof,
mm,
but the number of needs for them is not going to change. It's just not going to be because a refrigerator broke, a chiller breaks, right? It's 6:49 just before dinner service. That's a good thing.
mhm, mhm. Wow. Well, so the book is really a fun read. You invoke history and biology and dinosaur examples and everything, which is kind of fun, in a business book. And I read a lot of business books, so so I'm keenly aware of that. So how do people learn more? How do they sort of figure out how to partake of your world,
Yeah.
and get smarter about all this stuff?
Well, you can always find me at jonathanbrill.com. The latest stuff is there, where I have a column in Psychology Today about the future of organizations and how to thrive and build teams that thrive. And I'm always glad to chat with you about whatever it is you're interested in, and how to move your business forward.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the book. Did you know there's another book about octopus organizations that just came out? It was published by
I
Harvard Business Review.
I do.
And I thought that was such a coincidence that, I mean, we're all sort of circling, I think, around the same phenomena, which is how do we push decision rights out to the edges? How do we make organizations smarter where they kind of come into contact with their environment? And I think a good kind of takeaway to reflect on for those that are listening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see you, Rita.
Good to see you.